5 days. That's how long it's been since I let him into our house. The boy. I can't even bring myself to call him anything else. That's what he is to me, the boy. It started as a favor, a simple tutoring session my wife promised would be over in an hour. Just one time, she said, a little extra help to boost his grades. She'd been insistent, her eyes wide with that hopeful expression she gets when she's asking for something important. She always knew how to get me to say yes, even when I didn't want to. I never should have agreed. Now, 5 days later, I can't escape it. I sit in our bedroom, headphones plugged in, trying to drown out the sound of her voice. The way it changes when she speaks to him. So much softer, so much more patient than when she talks to me. There's a part of me that's sick of the math, sick of the endless explanations. But mostly, I'm sick of him. He first showed up on Monday, walking into our house with that cocky, self-assured grin that made my stomach tighten. He's tall, almost gangly, but he carries himself with a confidence that seems too practiced for someone his age. I couldn't help but notice the way he looked at my wife, like he was studying her, assessing her. At first, I thought it was just me overreacting. But then, I caught him sneaking a glance at her when she bent down to grab a book from the shelf. His eyes lingered a moment too long. He didn't even try to hide it. She didn't see it. Of course, she didn't. I tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to nothing. Maybe it was a fluke, a trick of the light. But it's been 5 days now, and I can't unsee it. And his voice. God, the way he talks. He's got this casual, almost lazy tone, like he's bored by everything, until he's talking to her. Then it's different. He leans in just a little, his voice dropping a notch, like he's sharing some private joke. Every time she smiles back, every time she asks if he needs a break, or if he wants something to drink, it feels like an unspoken bond forming. And I hate it. I hate the way he looks at her, the way he talks to her, the way he moves around our house like it's already his. At first, I tried to push the thoughts away, convinced I was being paranoid. I mean, it wasn't like she'd never had students over before. But this kid, he was different. There was something about him I couldn't put my finger on. It was the way he tilted his head when he spoke to her, like he was savoring every word she said, the way his hand brushed too close to hers when he passed her a pen. It was small things, but they added up, and every time I saw it, I felt something stir deep in my gut. But the worst part? The part that really got to me? The way she seemed to be changing. Her energy, her smile. Everything seemed brighter when he was around. I started noticing the little things. How her laugh was different. How she'd blush when he praised her. I'm not saying she wasn't kind, but this was different. She wasn't like this with anyone else. Not like this with me. I wanted to tell her, to ask if she noticed it too, but she was so determined to help him, so sure he had some special potential. She talked about him like he was the next Einstein, like he had this hidden brilliance that needed nurturing. She told me she saw something in him, something she couldn't explain but felt deep down. And that's what got to me, because I don't believe in that. Not anymore. Not the way she does. She started going on and on about how he was from a broken home, how he'd been struggling but was too proud to ask for help. And the more she talked about him, the more urgent it became. She needed to be the one to help him. She needed to make a difference. Why? I tried to push it aside at first, thinking it was just her being, well, her. She's always been the fixer, the one who sees potential in people. But there's something different about this one. She's too obsessed with him. And I can't help but feel like there's more to it than just extra credit. I think she's starting to change too. And that terrifies me. I didn't want to say anything at first, but now I can't help myself. Every time she looks at him, I feel like I'm losing her. It's subtle, but it's there. Her moods are different when he's around. She's more animated, and not in the way she used to be, the way she'd talk to me, soft and slow. Now it's fast, like she's always on edge, always anticipating his next question, his next smile. It's unnerving. 5 days. It should have ended by now, but it hasn't. And I can't shake the feeling that it won't end until something snaps. When I first agreed to this, I thought it would be harmless. A tutor session here, a study group there. But each day I spend in this house, the more I wonder if I made the biggest mistake of my life. Because I don't trust him. And I don't trust her anymore either. Something's happening. Something I can't see clearly yet, but I know it's coming. And when it hits, I don't think I'll be able to stop it. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, I couldn't take it anymore. I had been sitting upstairs, trying to stay busy, trying to keep my mind off the low, seething anger that had been building inside me for days. But it was useless. Every word my wife said to him, every laugh they shared, every time he lingered just a little too long after a simple tutoring session, it was getting under my skin in ways I couldn't control. It was always like this at first. I told myself it was just a few tutoring sessions, just a small thing. But with each day, with each hour they spent together, the line between nothing and too much began to blur. And now, after 5 days of this, I was done. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly from the frustration that had been building up. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I grabbed the railing as I made my way downstairs, my feet heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. She was in the kitchen, the faint smell of coffee still hanging in the air. Her back was turned to me as she put away some mugs. For a moment, I thought I could just walk away, leave it alone, but I couldn't. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. Why did you speak so loudly? My voice was a little harsher than I meant, but it was too late to take it back. Couldn't you have been quieter? I'm tired of it. You know. She froze for a second. A pause, a slight shift of her shoulders, like she hadn't expected me to say it. But then she turned around, her eyes wide with something like surprise. Or maybe it was anger. Hard to tell. What do you mean? She snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. What is it you don't like anymore? I could feel my chest tighten, the pressure mounting. There was something in her voice, something that cut through me. Why was she acting like this? Why was she so defensive? Maybe we should go to the basement to study. Huh? I said, the words coming out without thinking. Maybe you'll teach him at school instead of dragging him into our home every day. Why does it have to be here? Why not at his place? The air in the room seemed to thicken. She took a step forward, her face flushed with frustration. You think I'm dragging him into this house? What the hell are you talking about? Her voice had gone from defensive to downright combative. She was shouting now, her hands on her hips like she was ready for a fight. I could feel the anger surging through me, hot and fast, like a river breaking through a dam. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't stop it. I don't like how you're acting. That's what I don't like. You're different. You're not the same with him. You're treating him like he's some kind of special project. Her face twisted in disbelief, and for a second, I thought she might laugh it off. But then her jaw set, and her eyes hardened. So what? Now I'm not allowed to help someone just because you feel uncomfortable? Maybe you should look in the mirror, because you're the one with the problem, not me. Her words felt like a slap. I wasn't expecting this. She'd never shouted at me before, never escalated a disagreement like this. I could feel the bile rising in my throat, the frustration pressing against my ribs. It wasn't just about the tutoring anymore. It wasn't even about the boy. It was about her, this woman I thought I knew, who had always been calm, collected, patient, and who now seemed to be changing right before my eyes. The anger made it impossible to hold back. You're not the woman I married, I shouted, the words cutting through the air like a knife. She flinched, but it didn't stop her. Oh, so now I'm the problem? I'm the one who's changed? She was practically seething now, and I could see the flush in her cheeks, the fire in her eyes that made me step back for a moment, unsure of what to say next. You think I don't notice it? She went on, her voice rising. How you been acting? How you been pulling away? You think I don't see you sulking upstairs while I try to help someone who actually needs it? I'm not sulking, I yelled back, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I'm not the one who's acting strange around him, trying to act like you're different around him. What the hell is it about him that makes you forget about us? Her eyes narrowed. Maybe you should just leave then if you can't handle it, she snapped. Maybe you should go to the basement and study yourself, alone, since you seem to think that's what's best. It hit me like a punch to the gut. We never fought like this. Never. She had always been the calm one, the level-headed one, the one who kept things in balance. But now, here we were, shouting at each other like strangers, like something had broken between us, and I couldn't figure out what it was. We stood there, both of us breathing hard, caught in the heat of the argument. She turned on her heel, her face set in stone, and stormed up the stairs. I didn't follow her, didn't chase after her. I could hear her slam the bedroom door behind her. I stood there in the kitchen for a moment, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, my heart still pounding in my chest. I felt sick. What the hell had just happened? I never thought a simple tutoring session could unravel everything. But I could feel it now. Something was breaking, something inside our house. And I didn't know if it could be fixed. The sound of her muttering behind the locked door echoed down the hall, but I didn't move. Not yet. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure I could. I stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air biting at my skin. The silence of the house felt suffocating. My pulse was still racing, my chest tight with the remnants of the fight. But at least I could breathe out here, away from her, away from that tension. The anger that had consumed me earlier began to fade, replaced by a cold, gnawing realization. I fumbled for a cigarette, the flick of the lighter, the only sound in the quiet night. I inhaled deeply, the smoke hitting the back of my throat, the burn a welcome distraction. The streetlights flickered faintly in the distance, casting long shadows on the pavement. The world felt distant out here, removed from the mess I had just made inside. I didn't even know what I was angry about anymore. At first, I thought it was just the kid, the way he'd looked at her, the way she'd seemed so different around him. But now, standing here in the cold, the fog of my rage starting to lift, I understood something I hadn't before. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't trying to replace me or push me away. She was just trying to help. That was her nature. She always wanted to save people, to fix things that were broken. And this boy, this kid, was broken. I had misunderstood everything. I had been so wrapped up in my own feelings, in my own insecurities, that I couldn't see what she was really doing. She wasn't treating him like some kind of special project out of some misplaced sense of guilt. She genuinely believed in him. She saw something in him, something she couldn't explain. I took another drag of the cigarette, watching the smoke curl up into the night. What was I really angry about? That she wanted to help someone? That she cared for him? Was I so selfish that I couldn't see past my own stupid pride? I exhaled slowly, the weight of my actions sinking in. I'd hurt her. I'd hurt us. And now, I didn't know how to fix it. But I knew I had to try. I stomped out the cigarette, my resolve firming. I couldn't let this go on. I needed to apologize. I needed to make it right. I pushed open the door and walked inside, the house still eerily quiet. I stood there for a moment, hesitant. But then I moved toward the stairs, my steps heavy as I made my way to our bedroom. The door was closed, just like it had been when she stormed off earlier. I didn't knock. I didn't think I had the right. Instead, I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice quiet, almost too quiet. I was out of line. I didn't mean what I said. The silence stretched on for a long time, longer than I expected. I could hear her breathing on the other side, but she didn't answer. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry," I repeated, this time with more force. I shouldn't have yelled. I shouldn't have said those things. I know you're trying to help him. I know that now. I don't know. I was wrong. A few more seconds passed. Then I heard the click of the lock turning, the door creaking open just a crack. I could see her shadow standing in the dim light of the room. Her voice was quiet, measured, but I could hear the tension in it. "I'll forgive you," she said softly. "If you let him come again." I felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly replaced by the same knot in my stomach. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, but could you at least make sure he doesn't speak so loudly? I can't stand it anymore. It's too much." She didn't say anything at first, but after a beat, she gave a quiet, "Okay." I exhaled, relieved but still uneasy. We weren't done yet. I knew that. But for now, this was enough. I hesitated before I said anything else. "Tomorrow, I have to go to Brian's to pick up the tools I lent him." She nodded again, her face still unreadable in the dim light. "Okay." I stood there for a moment, unsure of what else to say, but when she didn't move to close the door, I took it as my cue to leave. I turned to go, my mind still racing, but now with a sense of quiet acceptance. I'd apologized. I'd admitted I was wrong. I knew this wasn't over. Maybe it was only just beginning, but for now, I woke up early that morning, earlier than usual. The house was still wrapped in the soft haze of dawn, the light filtering through the blinds in thin, golden strips. I lay there for a while, watching the shadows shift on the wall, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The air was still and quiet, and for the first time in days, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. My mind wandered back to last night, to the fight and the apology. I still wasn't sure what I had expected, but I knew I needed to make things right. Really right. I had done something I never thought I'd do. I'd raised my voice and I'd hurt her. The idea of it gnawed at me. My wife, the woman I had shared so many years with, deserved more than that. She deserved more than me snapping, because I was jealous of a teenager who was probably just trying to get his life together. So, I decided to do something out of character. I slipped out of bed quietly, trying not to wake her. I hadn't cooked for her in years, not like this. We'd always been busy, rushing in and out, eating on the go, or picking up something quick. But today I wanted to show her that I could still do something for her, something small but meaningful. I made her breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee, and some fruit on the side. Nothing fancy, but it was a gesture. As I carried the tray up the stairs, the weight of it felt heavier than it should. Maybe I was hoping it would fix things, or at least soften the tension that had hung over us for days now. When I placed it on her side of the bed, she stirred, groggily opening her eyes. I expected her to smile, or at least offer a quiet thank you. But she didn't. Instead, she blinked a few times, her eyes still a little foggy from sleep. "What's this?" she asked, her voice thick with morning sleep. "Breakfast," I said, trying to sound casual, but it felt like an effort. I thought you'd like it." She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she'd even take a bite. But then she reached for the coffee, and that was enough. "You didn't have to do this," she said, taking a sip, her voice still soft but no longer cold. "I know," I replied, my voice quieter than usual. "But I wanted to." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, it felt like things were back to normal, like the fight never happened. She ate the breakfast slowly, talking about school, about what she had to do that day. I listened, not interrupting, just absorbing the sound of her voice, the sound that had always been a comfort to me. After a while, she finished, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and got dressed for work. She was gone before I knew it, leaving me standing in the quiet house, the peace of the morning already slipping away. It felt strange being alone again, but there was a sense of calm now, a stillness that allowed me to breathe a little easier. The tension from the night before hadn't completely disappeared, but it felt like we were on the mend, like I'd taken the first step. I spent the morning pacing around the house, doing small things to keep busy. The house had never felt this empty when she wasn't around. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I took a shower, hoping the fresh water would clear my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, that nagging voice in the back of my mind that kept whispering at me, telling me something wasn't right. At 11 a.m., I finally decided to leave. I had to pick up the tools from Brian's place. Nothing urgent, but it gave me something to do. I grabbed my keys, slipped into the car, and drove. It was a long drive, but the road was familiar, and the time passed quickly. Brian was a good guy, always quick to help out when I needed something, even if it was just a hand with tools or a beer after a long day of work. We talked for a while when I arrived, catching up on things, talking about random stuff. Nothing that really mattered, but it felt nice to talk to someone who wasn't her. We stayed there until almost 3 p.m., and I felt a little guilty when I finally checked the time. I had promised to be home by 4, but I had something else planned. I had a small idea, something that might smooth things over for her, something she would appreciate. On my way home, I stopped by a flower shop. A small gesture, I told myself, but I wanted her to know that I was thinking of her, that I wanted to make it up. I picked out a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, and a bottle of champagne. She'd always liked champagne, the kind of thing you could share after a long, hard day. When I got home, the house was still quiet. The door was open, but she wasn't back yet. I set the flowers and champagne on the kitchen counter, trying to imagine the smile on her face when she saw it. She'd be pleased, I thought. Maybe it was silly, but it was something. That's when I noticed it. Her purse. It was sitting on the kitchen table, right where it shouldn't be. She never left it behind. She was meticulous about it, always carried it with her, whether she was going to work or just out for a quick errand. But there it was, abandoned, and the house was empty. I stood frozen for a moment, a cold shiver running through me. She hadn't mentioned leaving anything behind, and she hadn't said anything about coming home early, either. I couldn't remember if she'd even been here this morning. My heart started to race. Maybe she forgot it. Maybe it wasn't anything, just a mistake. But the nagging feeling from earlier returned, louder this time. I shook my head, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But as I stood there, staring at her purse, a growing sense of unease settled in my stomach. Something wasn't adding up. Where was she? And why had she left her purse behind? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside. It was just a slip-up, right? She probably just forgot the purse, or maybe it was a random thing. I couldn't keep worrying about it. Not now. I had flowers and champagne waiting, a meal I was preparing, and I needed to focus on making things right with her. So, I threw my worries away like I had done 1,000 times before. I put on some music, poured the champagne into the fridge, and arranged the flowers in a vase. It all seemed so trivial, so small in the grand scheme of things. But I needed this. We needed this. I moved through the house, tidying up here and there, setting the table like it was some kind of grand gesture. As I was putting the finishing touches on the meal, I remembered the twists in the basement, the ones I had promised to bring upstairs. They were in the corner, hidden behind the old boxes, just waiting for me to take care of them. I didn't think much of it at first, but then, as I walked toward the door, I realized the basement door was slightly ajar. I paused, furrowing my brow. I was certain I had locked it earlier. I always locked it. Maybe I had just forgotten. Maybe she'd opened it this morning to grab something and left it that way. But even as I thought it, a small knot of doubt twisted in my gut. Something didn't sit right. Still, I couldn't let it go on, so I decided to go downstairs, grab the damn twist, and get on with it. I pushed the thought from my mind, convinced it was just me overreacting. I opened the basement door, and that's when I heard it. At first, it was just muffled sound, a murmur. It didn't register in my brain immediately, but as I stepped closer, the voices became clearer. Her voice. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. She was talking to someone. No, it wasn't just talking, it was something more. Something off. Then I heard his voice. That familiar, irritating tone. It was him. My mind went blank. What was he doing here? I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead as I moved silently down the stairs. The creaky wood under my feet, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The voices grew louder. Let's slow down, I heard her say, her voice soft but firm. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a drum that echoed through the hollow space. My hands were shaking. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to stop, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But my feet kept moving closer and closer to the basement floor, drawn to the source of the sound like some horrible magnet. And then I saw them. My wife was standing there, but she wasn't dressed like she had been this morning. She was wearing nothing but her underwear. Her skin was pale under the dim, flickering light of the basement, but it was the position of her body that made my blood run cold. She was lying back, her legs sprawled on the floor, as if she had been moving, doing something. And he was there too. That goddamn an 18-year-old boy. The moment I laid eyes on them, the air seemed to leave the room. I couldn't speak at first, couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision narrowing. It was all I could do to stop my body from reacting, from rushing in, from screaming. My heart was hammering in my throat, but I managed to choke out the words. What the hell is going on? I shouted, the sound of my voice like a slap in the face. Her face went ghostly white. She froze, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She looked at me, then at him, her eyes wide with panic, with something I couldn't quite place. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't piece it together. But it wasn't just guilt that I saw. It was the same look I'd seen in his eyes that first day, the same damn look that had unsettled me from the start. I stood there in shock, my body frozen in place, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. Was this real? Was this really happening? I wanted to move, to do something, but my legs felt like stone. I just stood there, staring, as they both stared at me, at each other. and the seconds stretched out like hours. Finally, she spoke, but it was just a murmur, a shaky whisper. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible, her body still trembling. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was supposed to scream, cry, or just walk away. But one thing was certain. My entire world had just come crashing down. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, watching her, the woman I had spent the last decade of my life with, as she sat there, looking back at me with eyes that seemed to beg for understanding, but I knew there was none left to give. The young man beside her, the one who wasn't even a shadow of the life we had built together, looked at me like I was the intruder, like he had every right to be there. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Then, slowly, she stood up, her hands shaking as she reached for the edge of the bed, avoiding my gaze. I could see it now, the shame in her posture, the way she held herself as if trying to shrink into the shadows of her betrayal. But it was too late for that. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I went from here to the mountain and started screaming. Curse, I spat, the word tasting bitter in my mouth, like it was foreign to me. But it was all that came to mind in that moment. The only thing that could begin to describe the storm boiling inside me. Curse! I shouted again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the house. I could feel my fists clenched tighter, the blood rushing to my head. Every ounce of anger that had been bubbling under the surface for months, maybe even years, finally broke free. Without thinking, I started grabbing anything within reach. The vase on the counter, the framed picture of our wedding day. Everything. I threw it across the room, smashing it into the wall. Shards of glass and porcelain rained down, but I didn't care. My hands found the next object and hurled it, not caring about the mess, the damage, or the consequences. I could hear her voice now, weak, pleading, trying to speak over the chaos. Please stop. It's not what you think. I snapped. You think I'm an idiot, don't you? I yelled at her, turning on her with a fire I hadn't known I was capable of. You really thought I wouldn't notice? You thought I wouldn't see the way you were looking at him? That way. I stepped forward, seething, my voice rising with every word. Is this your plan, huh? To bring him into my house? To throw it all away like it was nothing? My breath was shallow now, my chest tight with fury. She was trembling now, her face pale, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But then I saw it, the glint in her eyes. It wasn't fear anymore. No, it was something else. A shift. She stood up straighter, her eyes narrowing, as she took a step towards me. It was like a switch had been flipped. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by something colder, something sharper. I'm tired of this, she spat, her voice shaking but strong. I'm tired of you. I stopped dead in my tracks, the words like a slap to the face. My chest tightened, my heart, already shredded, cracked open further. What the hell are you saying? I demanded, my voice faltering for the first time. What the hell do you mean by that? I want him, she said, her eyes blazing now, daring me to say anything to challenge her. I want him, not you. I've been pretending long enough. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't process it, couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating me. What? I gasped, stepping back. You want him? Do you want this 18-year-old boy? My voice cracked, the words tasting sour on my tongue. He's a child. He's 18, for God's sake. I love him. He'll be 19 in a month. She shouted, as if that made it all make sense. He's young, he's alive, and he makes me feel alive too. I don't want you anymore. I'm done. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're done? I repeated, my voice hoarse, the pain slicing through me. After everything? After us? You're just going to throw it all away? Yeah, I am, she said, her words sharp, final. She turned her back on me, walking toward the door, like she was already done with the life we had built. I'm leaving. I'm going to be with him. I stood frozen, my mind racing, my body shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Pack your things and go then, I said through gritted teeth. Why the hell are you still here? If that's what you want, then go. I don't want to see you. I'm done too. But she didn't leave. She stood there, her back to me, her body stiff. And in that moment, I realized something. This was real. She had already made her choice. And so I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't bear to see her face, the one I had loved, the one that had shared my bed for 12 years. All of it gone. I stood there, shaking, barely holding myself together, as she packed her things. She moved methodically, as if she'd been planning this for weeks, months even. The clothes, the pictures, the memories we'd built together gone. She didn't even look back at me, not once, not even a glance, not a shred of regret. She walked out of our life like it was nothing, with that young man trailing behind her, his smug grin never leaving his face. I couldn't stand it. Get out, I choked, barely able to get the words out through the knot in my throat. Just get out, and don't ever come back. She paused for a moment, a small hesitation in her step, but then she pushed past me, out the door, as if she couldn't leave fast enough. I didn't even wait for the door to close before I did it. I threw the plate at the door. It crashed against the wood with a deafening sound, shattering into pieces, the sharp shards falling to the floor like my broken heart. But nothing could change what had already happened. Nothing could put the pieces of my life back together. And then there was silence. I sank to the floor, my legs giving out beneath me. Tears blurred my vision, my body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. Why? I kept whispering to myself. Why? After everything, why? All 12 years of marriage, of memories, of dreams for the future gone. Just like that. In the blink of an eye, it was over. She was gone. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in the wreckage of my own life, but eventually, I picked up the phone. I needed someone. I called Brian. His voice was shaky when he answered. Hello. Brian, it's over. She's gone, I said, my voice cracking with the weight of it all. What? What do you mean? Are you okay? He sounded shocked, disoriented. He couldn't process it either, not yet. But I didn't have the strength to explain. I told him everything that had happened. How she packed up and left. How she didn't even look back. How she walked out of my life with this 18-year-old boy. Brian was in shock, but he didn't know what to say. He just kept asking me over and over if I was okay. But I wasn't. I wasn't even close. The next day, I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to face the reality of what had happened. But eventually, my body forced me out of bed. It was almost 11 a.m., and I felt like a ghost, moving through my own life. As I walked into the kitchen, I saw something lying on the floor just outside the door. A letter. I bent down and picked it up, my hands trembling. The moment I saw the words written on the paper, it felt like the floor was pulled out from beneath me. A divorce letter. I couldn't breathe. I sank to my knees again, holding the paper in my hands like it was some kind of death sentence. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind. I couldn't believe it. She had already signed it. It was official. There was nothing left for me here. The next week was a blur. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely make it through the day. I just went through the motions, a hollow version of the person I used to be. The house felt emptier than ever, and I couldn't stop drinking. Alcohol was the only thing that numbed the pain, even if just for a moment. But nothing worked. I drank more than I ever had, trying to forget, trying to drown out the feelings of betrayal and loss. But no matter how much I drank, the pain never went away. It only grew deeper, and I felt myself spiraling further into darkness. Brian showed up one afternoon, looking worried. He sat me down, and for the first time since everything happened, he was the one trying to keep me from losing it completely. You can't keep doing this, man, he said. You've got to get out of this hole, or it's going to swallow you whole. I looked at him, my eyes blurry, not able to say a word. You're better than this, he continued, his voice firm. You're not the guy who lets life crush him. You're not the guy who stays down. You got to rise up. You got to get up and start over. I hated him in that moment, hated how he was trying to pull me out of my misery. But deep down, I knew he was right. I couldn't stay here, lost in this endless pit of self-pity and despair. I sold the house. I packed up my life, or what was left of it, and moved to a new city, hoping that a change of scenery might help me forget. I thought it would give me a fresh start. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could leave the past behind. But fate had other plans. On my first day in the new city, The world seemed to slow down. I was walking down the street, trying to adjust to my new life, when it happened. A car, speeding around the corner, didn't see me in time. The impact knocked me off my feet. My body hit the pavement with a sickening thud. I didn't even have time to process what was happening. As the world went dark, the last thing I thought was, maybe I can escape it all after all.